Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I want to try to say something about Cervantes' masterpiece, Don Quixote. More specifically, I want to talk a little bit about that iconic character, Don Quixote himself, and how it is, in a weird way, he has a lot to teach us. Okay, but maybe it's best to start at the beginning. So, if you don't know, Don Quixote wasn't always the infamous Don Quixote most of us have heard of. You know, that noble knight-errant. No, actually, his real name was Alonso. And for most of his life, he was an absolute nobody. He was a non-entity. He was poor and single and confined to the company of his housekeeper. And most importantly, he spent all of his time at home obsessively reading books, and specifically reading books about the lives of others. Okay, now with respect to all his reading, I think we could see in Alonso here a kind of escape from himself. I mean, for example, Schopenhauer tells us that when we read, what's going on is that another person thinks for us. That when we read, our head becomes the arena of someone else's thought. This explains, Schopenhauer thinks, why it is we feel such relief when we turn to reading after being occupied with ourselves. But more importantly, for Schopenhauer, too much reading is nothing but thoughtless diversion. It's a diversion not only from self, but from living and from forging a self through living. And what's more, we might also see reading, especially what Alonso reads, as a kind of escape from both time itself and the external world. I mean, for example, the historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, argues that that reading in our contemporary world actually performs a mythological function in that in entering into a story, it serves to project us outside of our personal duration, again, working as a kind of refuge from time. Now, clearly something like this is what's going on with Alonso. After all the books that he reads about knights are mythical and eternal. Okay, but then, one day, early dawn, things change. Suddenly, Alonso, in his early 50s now, decides to, quote, turn knight-errant and travel through the world with horse and armor in search of adventures. And as of that moment, Don Quixote de la Mancha is born. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, it seems that Alonso has decided that his response to life will no longer be one of escape or resignation. No, he will stop reading and just get out of the house. He will now act. He will forge a self and willfully enter into time and accept the scars of decline and futility. And all of this in the dry, burning plains of central Spain. Now, at a broader level, I think that what the author, Cervantes, is partly saying is that the best way of acquiring meaning in life, especially in a fundamentally tragic world, is to, above all, act, to take action. It's to go out into the harshness of the real world and engage with it. And this is what Don Quixote does. Actually, as a newly born knight-errant, he not only wants to act, but he actually wants to change the world. He wants to make it a better place. He wants to bring peace and justice to all. In this way, he's a bit like Hamlet, who says, "The world is out of sorts, and I'm here to make it right." Unlike Sancho, his sidekick, what Quixote does is he refuses to accept what Freud called the reality principle. He refuses to accept the way that things are. Okay, but perhaps more importantly, having left his house, now Quixote is clearly open to being shaped by his encounters in the rough and mysterious landscape of La Mancha, in those roads less traveled. The point is that when he puts himself out there, he finds himself having to respond to a particular situation. The world, in other words, now calls him to account. In a way, of course, it didn't when he spent all of his time inside his study reading all those books. And is there any more immediate solution to nihilism or apathy than this? Viktor Frankl, the famous psychiatrist and concentration camp survivor, expressed something similar. Speaking of his time in camp, he said, "We had to learn what life expected of us, not what we expected from life." In other words, life presents all of us with problems that we must try to find the answers to. And it sets tasks for us that we must confront and take responsibility for. I mean, it's one thing to set goals where the boundaries and the expectations are established beforehand, to play it safe and to keep everything predictable. But it's another to open oneself up to the unfamiliar, where entirely new directions and possibilities and experiences suddenly manifest themselves to us. Well, that's what happens with Don Quixote. Don Quixote's constant encounters with the unfamiliar continuously call him to account. They give him a purpose, and they transform him and carve him into a pretty unique individual. Okay, well, I want to say at least one last thing, and it has to do with Don Quixote's so-called madness or his delusions. That no small matter of the windmills and the barber's basin. So, if you don't know, what Don Quixote sees are terrible giants instead of windmills, and a legendary helmet instead of a barber's basin. All to the great concern of his sidekick, Sancho, by the way. Okay, now, is he simply crazy for this? Is he crazy for attacking windmills, thinking that they're giants? Well, I don't think so. I think it's important to notice what he says to Sancho regarding that is Sancho's, skepticism towards the alleged helmet. In a moment of remarkable lucidity and earnestness, Quixote tells him that although he understands how it is this might look like nonsense and illusion, it's actually not. Rather, it's the work of enchantment. And by the way, the enchantment motif is something that's raised throughout the novel. Now, this is important because it shows that though Quixote sees what he sees alone, he's also able to see what others see. In other words, he's not delusional. Okay, but then what's he doing exactly? Well, Quixote is often perceived as someone retreating into his own little cloistered world, right? But here's the thing. Maybe it's not Quixote who does this, but all of us who read him this way. In other words, it is we, the general run of people, in our literal and formal mindedness, who carve out our own self-complacent corner in the intellectual and perceptual landscape, retreating from the complexity and the strangeness and the possibilities of life in the process. After all, things are not always nor only as they immediately appear to be. Reality can be recast and heightened. Actually, no, it's interesting. Nietzsche, who often speaks of Don Quixote, understood this. What he did is he counseled us to look out at the same world with more eyes and different eyes, and to seek out the strange and the questionable. In any case, this is what Don Quixote does that most of us refuse to do or are incapable of doing. He transforms mundane, profane situations, everyday circumstances, into extraordinary and magical phenomena. He understands that often it's the practical and the pragmatic that's the real craziness. He understands that what madness is to surrender your dreams and to give up trying to transform the world, even if you don't have all the resources that you need. He understands that the real lunacy is to see life as it is and not as it should be. You know, the Spanish philosopher Unamuno has an interesting explanation for Don Quixote's madness. Quixote lost his wits, he said, for our sake, for our benefit, so as to leave us an eternal example of spiritual generosity. In other words, this Spanish Christ went mad, not for our sins, but as an atonement for our dreariness, for our lack of big-heartedness, and for our poverty of imagination. Quixote is the gospel of our modern age. And here's something else too. What Don Quixote's enchanted or magical outlook does is it helps to elevate and to inspire others, and often makes them feel better about themselves, even though, of course, sometimes they are in part only playing along. I mean, first of all, as everyone knows, and although she never appears in the story, he transforms the rustic daughter of a poor farmer into the most superhumanly beautiful princess on earth. But most fascinating to me is what happens when he meets the two prostitutes at that grimy inn. What he does is he describes them as two beautiful maidens who are taking air at the gates of the castle. And we have to keep in mind here that prostitutes were regarded at this time as the lowest of the lowest. Anyway, initially they laugh at him and they think he's crazy. But because of his insistence on the truth of his own vision, they eventually start to soften up. They help him out of his armor, and they eventually set a table for him. And soon they start treating him as a knight, as someone to be respected. And he keeps treating them with deference, as ladies. So they slowly start to behave as ladies. So notice what Don Quixote has done here. He's gotten the two women to see themselves, if only for a moment, in a totally different way, in an altogether new light. He has helped them to transcend themselves. And let's not forget about Sancho, who because of Don Quixote sees himself as a potential great governor and not an insignificant peasant anymore. In other words, what Quixote often does is he ennobles others he sees the best in them, their more lovely sides. Actually, Plato suggests something very similar in his dialogue, the Symposium. There he says that love involves seeing someone not exactly as they are, but as they could be, at their most best and beautiful. But anyway, let's also keep in mind that it's because Don Quixote is himself a beautiful person that all of this is possible. Actually, it's interesting that Dostoevsky thought that of all the beautiful individuals in literature, the one that stood out to him the most was Don Quixote. He even modeled his Prince Mishkin on him in his novel, The Idiot. Anyway, to get back to Quixote's wondrous view of the world and of people. So, if we doubt that he doesn't have this effect on people, all we have to do is to turn to Quixote's friends at the very end of the novel. So, in the last chapter, we find Don Quixote in the process of dying, admitting to his friends that his past behavior has been nothing but fraud and folly. Nothing but mad visions. Now, remarkably, his friends, including Sancho, plead with him to stop talking like that. They implore him to get back to their mission. No, he replies sadly, there are no birds in last year's nest. But here's the thing. The truth of the matter is that Don Quixote de la Mancha has been liberating not only for Alonso, but for everybody in his orbit, including, let's not forget, us readers. He has appealed to the dreamer in all of them. He has forever transformed them. The last thing that they want to do is go back to their unsentimental and denuded lives, their canny homes. No, not when there is a Mambrino's helmet out there. And one very last important point here. We should keep in mind that Don Quixote is not the one that's dying at the end of the story. The life goes out of Alonso, not Don Quixote. Don Quixote cannot die. While Alonso dies, crushed under the weight of reality, Don Quixote rides out of the novel and lives forever in mythology as that noble knight. As such, he is transformed into the eternal symbol of humanity's best intentions and highest ideals, forever reminding us that no good deed can be ridiculous or ugly, and just how important an indomitable spirit can be in a world marked by imperfection and tragedy. Bye for now.